A successful movie can spawn off a sequel or potentially an entire franchise. Usually that means most of the cast is asked to return, but some were not. There's plenty of reasons these actors got axed from these movies. It's one thing to miss out on a sequel that flops and inevitably goes nowhere. It's another thing to sit out a follow-up that opens the door to one of the largest, most ambitious franchises in movie history. Alas, that is the premise of The Ballad of Terrence Howard. When Robert Downey Jr. first put on his Iron Man suit in 2008, Howard was by his side as James Rhodes, Tony Stark's close friend and future war machine. Yet 2 years later, when Stark was called on once again to save the world, Rhodey looked a lot less like Terrence Howard and a lot more like Don Cheadle. In the end, Cheadle would go on to play Rhodey/War Machine throughout the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right up through the 2023 Disney Plus series Secret Invasion. While Howard has a reputation for being difficult to work with, the actor said in interviews that his disappearance from the MCU had nothing to do with his attitude. Instead, he blamed his co-star.
That the person that I helped become Iron Man took the money that was supposed to go to me and pushed me out.
Howard elaborated further on the Sway in the Morning radio show, explaining that instead of paying him the $8 million he was originally offered for Iron Man 2, Marvel arranged to pay him just $1 million. Way back in the infancy of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the studio released The Incredible Hulk starring Oscar nominee Edward Norton. The movie wasn't quite the smash hit that many of its MCU successors would be, but it was received markedly better than Ang Lee's Hulk. Nevertheless, when it came time to integrate the big green guy into the rest of the MCU in The Avengers, it was Mark Ruffalo in the role of Bruce Banner. While plenty of disputes over actors returning to sequels involve money, this conflict seems decidedly tilted toward creative differences. Norton was an uncredited writer on the project, and he, along with the film's director, pushed for a version of the movie that was around 135 minutes. The studio was more interested in a leaner cut and won out with a 112-minute version. That may have been one of the reasons Norton refused to do much promotion for the film, though the actor claims he prefers to let his movies speak for themselves. In the end, it was more than the execs at Marvel Studios were willing to put up with. In explaining why the studio moved on from Norton, the president of Marvel Studios, Kevin Feige, said, "Our decision is definitely not one based on monetary factors, but instead rooted in the need for an actor who embodies the creativity and collaborative spirit of our other talented cast members. There's no I in team, and apparently no Norton either." Alec Baldwin already had a number of television and movie credits on his resume before signing on to star in The Hunt for Red October in 1990, but it was the role of Jack Ryan that helped propel him to a new level of stardom. With Tom Clancy writing so prolifically about the CIA analyst-turned-field agent, one would have thought that Baldwin was primed to reprise the role in any number of sequels. But when Patriot Games premiered in 1992, it was Harrison Ford, not Alec Baldwin, in the role of Jack Ryan. Ford would play Ryan again 2 years later in Clear and Present Danger before ceding the role to Ben Affleck in The Sum of All Fears. So, what happened? If Baldwin is to be believed, he was run off as a way for the movie studio to clear a debt. In 2011, the actor wrote that the reason he never appeared in Patriot Games is that Paramount Studios owed money to a very famous movie star after a previous film deal fell apart. So, in order to fulfill his financial obligation, Baldwin was pushed aside. While the famous movie star is never named, some have connected the dots to Harrison Ford. For his part, David Kirkpatrick, the executive Baldwin accused of engineering the move, chalked it up to, quote, an issue of script approval. Sometimes actors are completely caught by surprise when they don't get invited back for a sequel. Such was the case with Rachelle Lefevre, who was on the outside looking in when the cast for The Twilight Saga Eclipse was announced. Lefevre played the relatively minor role of Victoria in the first two films of the series. It was expected that the character would have a larger part in the story for the third film, but Bryce Dallas Howard wound up taking Lefevre's place. The move left Lefevre stunned, according to a statement. The actor says that the decision was made over a scheduling conflict in which another part would overlap with the shooting schedule for Eclipse by 10 days. Lefevre said that she was completely dedicated to the role of Victoria and didn't believe that the minor overlap should have caused a problem. The studio didn't take kindly to Lefevre's portrayal of what happened and released a statement of its own, claiming the actor wasn't being cooperative. Whatever the full story was, it certainly meant twilight time on Lefevre's run in a huge movie franchise. Were it not for the intrepid reporting of April O'Neil, the world might have never learned of the existence of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, at least if you believe the comic book lore. April O'Neil was played by Judith Hoag in the 1990 debut movie. At the time, Hoag was a 22-year-old actor working alongside Robin Williams in Cadillac Man and looking for her big break. Despite not knowing what Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was about, she took the role and worked a dual schedule to finish both movies. But when it came time to cast Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Secret of the Ooze, Hoag wasn't invited back. Her schedule likely had something to do with it, but not in the way one might think.
Will I ever see you guys again?
Hoag complained to the producers about the long 6-day shooting schedule as well as the film's heavy violence. She told Variety, "I think they thought I was too demanding and moved on." In her place, Paige Turco took over the role. Although Hoag was considered for the third film in the series, producers thought it might be too confusing for young viewers. Way back at the turn of the century, McGee, who at the time was best known for directing music videos, got his first turn at directing a feature film. The result was a new millennium reboot of the wildly popular 70s action drama Charlie's Angels, starring Drew Barrymore, Cameron Diaz, and Lucy Liu. While most moviegoers came for the three leads, one of the highlights of the film was comedy veteran Bill Murray in the role of Bosley, the Angels' desk-bound handler. But when the band got back together in 2003 for Charlie's Angels Full Throttle, Murray was noticeably absent. Instead, comedian Bernie Mac stepped into the role with the explanation that he was the adopted brother of the previous Bosley. Off-screen, however, it was more complicated than just wanting to make the sequel a family affair. Rumors swirled that Murray clashed with co-star Lucy Liu, leading him to decide that he no longer wanted to work with the actor. However, in the years since the film, both Murray and Liu have thrown cold water on that story, with the former saying it was an on-set argument that was blown out of proportion. The story that seems to have more legs is that Murray and director McGee butted heads, literally. Murray denies that the two had a physical altercation, though he did have some strong things to say about the director. Stieg Larsson's Millennium trilogy of books featuring the exploits of Swedish hacker Lisbeth Salander was an international phenomenon. In their native country, the books were adapted into a well-received movie trilogy with Noomi Rapace in the lead role. An American remake was inevitable, and Rooney Mara was cast alongside Daniel Craig in director David Fincher's 2011 adaptation of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. The movie earned overall positive reviews, pulled in over $230 million worldwide at the box office, and earned Mara an Oscar nomination. However, Fincher did not return to helm the 2018 sequel, The Girl in the Spider's Web, and Fede Alvarez took his place. Nonetheless, many expected Mara and Craig to return to their respective roles. Instead, Alvarez decided to go in a different direction with both of the main characters. He cast Claire Foy and Sverre Gudnason in the lead roles, telling EW, "I just didn't like the idea of taking someone else's cast." In the end, the movie didn't resonate with either critics or audiences. When director Tim Burton brought Batman to the big screen in 1989, audiences flocked to see Michael Keaton's Dark Knight battle Jack Nicholson's Joker through the gritty streets of Gotham City. Veteran actor Billy Dee Williams appeared on screen as Gotham District Attorney Harvey Dent, giving fans reason to assume that he would become the villain Two-Face in Burton's subsequent films. Unfortunately, that never happened, at least not with Williams in the role. When Burton's Batman Returns arrived in 1992, Harvey Dent was nowhere to be found. Instead, Batman battled the Penguin with Catwoman thrown into the mix. Burton eventually parted ways with the franchise following the box office disappointment of Batman Returns, and Joel Schumacher, who was tapped to direct Batman Forever, decided to go a different direction. Instead of Williams, he recruited Tommy Lee Jones to don the makeup for Two-Face.
And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to see what I could do with it. It would have been different than Tommy Lee's. I got my own kind of madness.
While Williams never got the chance to play the role in live action, the story does have a fairly happy ending. In 2017's The Lego Batman movie, he was cast as the voice of Two-Face. He was also portrayed as the classic villain in the comic book series Batman '89. Over the course of the Harry Potter series, many characters were recast for various reasons. Most notably, Ralph Fiennes took over for Richard Bremmer when Voldemort evolved from a disembodied face to a full-bodied Dark Lord, and Michael Gambon replaced the deceased Richard Harris as Dumbledore. One of the less discussed changes was with the fat lady who guarded the entrance to the Gryffindor common room. In Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Elizabeth Spriggs played the role. It was a bit of a surprising choice for a character that was beloved by fans for being brassy and vivacious. Spriggs was more known for supporting matriarchal roles in dramas like Sense and Sensibility. Perhaps that was part of the reason director Alfonso Cuarón decided to cast boisterous British comedian Don French in the role when he took over to make Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Michael J. Fox may have been the star of Back to the Future, but Crispin Glover gave a career-defining performance as George McFly. That made it all the more surprising when Glover didn't return for either of the movie's two sequels. For any moviegoers asking why the elder McFly was portrayed by a different actor in Back to the Future Part 2 and Part 3, the reason is likely because Glover himself was asking too many questions. According to Glover, he had a problem with the ending of the original film, saying it sent the message that money equals happiness, a contention that supposedly angered director Robert Zemeckis. Nevertheless, the actor claims he was still interested in being in the sequels, but the paycheck was much less than what he considered to be fair. Apparently, playing George McFly was not his destiny.
My density has brought me to you.
In 2000, UK-based Aardman Animation, best known for its Academy Award-winning stop-motion shorts featuring Wallace and Gromit, branched out into feature films with Chicken Run. Led by a hen named Ginger and a circus performer rooster named Rocky, the stories slated for slaughtered chickens stage a plan to literally fly the coop to freedom. Chicken Run was a massive hit. It earned $227 million at the worldwide box office, making it the top-grossing stop-motion animated movie of all time. English actor Julia Sawalha, probably best known for her role as Savvy on the cult favorite Britcom Absolutely Fabulous, voiced Ginger in the original Chicken Run. But when the long-awaited sequel went into production, she was not asked to return. The reason, according to Sawalha, was ageism. She wrote in an open letter posted to Twitter, "Last week, I was informed out of the blue via email through my agent that I would not be cast as Ginger in the Chicken Run sequel. The reason they gave is that my voice now sounds too old and they want a younger actress to reprise the role." Sawalha further noted that she wasn't even given the opportunity to provide a voice test to determine if her voice had indeed changed too much. So she did one herself and sent it to producers, who still opted to get someone else to portray Ginger in the 2023 sequel. Mel Gibson's big break in the film industry was his star-making role as Max Rockatansky in George Miller's 1979 cult classic Mad Max. The film was a success, and the sequel, The Road Warrior, became an international sensation that spawned a wave of copycats and imitators. Gibson reprised the role for that film and Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, but he was ousted and replaced by Tom Hardy when it came time for Mad Max Fury Road. At one point, Gibson was set to play Mad Max again in Fury Road, but many years and many scandals later, the plans for the film changed drastically. Miller first had the idea for Fury Road around the turn of the century and nearly went into production in 2001 with Gibson in the lead role, though the events of 9/11 caused the project to stall. Over a decade would pass before he got back around to making Fury Road. By the time Miller was ready to remount the production, Gibson had both aged out of the role and had gone through all of the personal scandals that had ravaged his viability as a leading man. Gibson and Miller had a mutual understanding about the replacement, and there was no bad blood between them. Gibson even attended the premiere of Fury Road and posed for photos with Miller and Hardy. When director Steven Soderbergh decided to remake the 1960 Rat Pack heist movie Ocean's 11, he modernized the plot for the 2000s, packed it full of Hollywood's biggest stars of the time, and expanded it into a full film franchise. In Ocean's 11, Ocean's 12, and Ocean's 13, Matt Damon filled the role of Linus Caldwell, with the final film hitting theaters in 2007. When the franchise received a spin-off 11 years later in the form of Ocean's 8, Damon was meant to reprise his role as Linus in a brief appearance alongside the new all-female cast. He shot his cameo, but it didn't make it into the film's final cut. Carl Reiner also shot a cameo appearance reprising his role as Saul Bloom, but he was left on the cutting room floor as well. Director Gary Ross said the removal of their cameos came about following reshoots and an extended editing process to make the story flow as smoothly as possible. The official reason for cutting Damon is innocuous enough, but some have posited that his removal may have been to avoid backlash. The actor had made public comments defending Harvey Weinstein, which led to an official petition to have him removed from the film ahead of its release. However, Ross denied that Damon's personal scandal influenced the decision to cut him from the film. Released in 2021, The Matrix Resurrections was the long-delayed fourth entry in the Matrix series, which had previously concluded with The Matrix Revolutions in 2003. In the nearly 2 decades between the third and fourth movies, there were some significant changes to the cast, but the reasons behind those changes are perhaps a bit questionable. Stars like Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss returned, but other prominent characters were recast, including Agent Smith and Morpheus. Hugo Weaving was initially supposed to reprise the Agent Smith role, but he ended up getting replaced by Jonathan Groff. The official reason for his absence was scheduling conflicts owing to his commitments to the National Theater. Weaving was willing to do both projects as long as his scenes could be shot a bit later, which almost happened. But director Lana Wachowski was unwilling to accommodate his busy schedule and opted to recast the role instead.
We're willing to wipe the slate clean.
Weaving had been open about his concerns that the Matrix Resurrections might not have been getting made for the right reasons, which may have factored into the decision to replace him. Lawrence Fishburne, on the other hand, wasn't invited to reprise the Morpheus role for reasons that were never made clear to him. The part instead went to Yahya Abdul-Mateen II. Aldis Hodge took on the role of Carter Hall, aka Hawkman, for the first time in the 2022 DC movie Black Adam opposite Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Hodge was supposed to play Hawkman for the second time the following year, but that didn't come to be. His second appearance as Hawkman was meant to be in Shazam! Fury of the Gods, a direct sequel to the first Shazam and part of the broader DC Extended Universe. Hawkman was supposed to recruit Shazam for the Justice Society in the post-credit scene. With all of the seismic changes at DC recently, following the James Gunn takeover and radical restructuring of future plotlines and characters, it would be natural to assume that Hawkman's appearance in Shazam! Fury of the Gods was nixed as part of the same shakeup. The truth, however, is that the change had nothing to do with any of that. Instead, the scene was cut at The Rock's behest. The news was confirmed by Shazam star Zachary Levi, who called out The Rock for blocking the Hawkman cameo as well as blocking the Shazam character from a cameo appearance in Black Adam. Levi even appeared to blame The Rock for the box office failure of Shazam! Fury of the Gods, although he later denied doing so. Sin City: A Dame to Kill For is both a prequel and sequel to the original Sin City. This belated follow-up to the original anthology features a new cast of characters alongside many familiar faces. Two characters who returned but were played by different actors were Manute and Dwight. Recasting Manute with Dennis Haysbert was an unfortunate necessity after the sad passing of original actor Michael Clark Duncan. The recasting of Dwight, however, was a bit more of a head-scratcher. Originally played by Clive Owen, the role was instead taken over by Josh Brolin, with his change in appearance justified by the character undergoing facial reconstruction surgery to look completely different. But the problem is that Dwight receives the surgery partway through A Dame to Kill For, with Brolin donning distracting prosthetics to make him look more like Owen. It seems like the perfect setup to have Owen finish the last stretch of the movie, and that was actually the original plan. But director Robert Rodriguez liked what Brolin did with the character and decided to use him for the whole film. It certainly helped that it was cheaper and easier to just use one actor instead of two.
Let the old Dwight go. Let it go of his old face.
Shortly ahead of shooting, Owen said he had never been asked about reprising his role as Dwight. He told IndieWire, "We never really talked about it." With a gargantuan 3-hour runtime and the lore from nearly 24 prior movies, Avengers Endgame was positively bursting at the seams with Marvel characters. It makes sense that in such an overstuffed undertaking, there was bound to be some material left on the cutting room floor. One actor who was cut out of the movie altogether was Katherine Langford, who played a grown-up version of Tony Stark's daughter, Morgan Stark. The character appeared in a vision to Tony in the latter stages of the film. The deleted scene eventually popped up on Disney+, accompanied by a commentary track from directors Anthony and Joe Russo. Joe Russo explained that the scene was cut for the sake of pacing and redundancy.
We felt like it ground the movie to a halt.
Additionally, they spoke on the pitfalls of making a movie of this scale, stating, "What can happen in a film this big is you can have ending after ending after ending, and it starts to feel like the movie's never going to end." As part of the ensemble cast of the original The Lord of the Rings trilogy, Christopher Lee left a huge impression as the villainous Saruman. After playing a significant role in the plots of The Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers, Saruman was entirely absent from the trilogy capper, The Return of the King. This may have come as a surprise to fans of the series, and it most definitely came as a surprise to Lee himself. Lee shot multiple scenes for The Return of the King, only for his character's presence in the film to be excised completely. The reason for Saruman's removal was because the character's storyline had been pretty much wrapped up by the end of The Two Towers. Director Peter Jackson planned to feature him near the beginning of the third movie for more definitive closure, but this ended up feeling unnecessary. It also harmed the pacing of the film once it was all edited together. Saruman's scenes were later included in the extended edition of The Return of the King, but Lee was quite upset he was cut from the theatrical versions. For a while, he held a grudge against Jackson, but they were able to smooth things over by the time the Hobbit trilogy was made, as Lee reprised the Saruman role in both the first and third movies. Before the Marvel Cinematic Universe became the crown jewel of superhero films, there was the X-Men series. While this franchise of superpower team-ups hasn't had quite the level of box office clout as the MCU in recent years, it still did have quite a bit of appeal. That appeal bubbled over for many comic enthusiasts when Olivia Munn was cast to play Psylocke in X-Men Apocalypse. Plenty of fans expected Munn to return for the final installment of the 20th Century Fox X-Men series, though that likely had something to do with Munn herself. She proclaimed ahead of time that Dark Phoenix would be a two-parter and that her character would definitely be making an appearance. The studio didn't take too kindly to the admission and sent a note to let her know as much.
I can't say anything because last time I said a little bit, they sent me a note.
Nonetheless, the slip of the tongue wasn't actually the reason Munn didn't return for Dark Phoenix. Instead, the issue was much simpler: scheduling conflicts. When the X-Men saddled up for their final ride at Fox, Munn was busy filming The Predator and was unavailable. Evan Peters played the supporting role of Todd, one of the high school buddies of the titular superhero in the first Kick-Ass. When it came time to make the sequel 3 years later, Peters was no longer involved. However, Todd was not only still a part of the plot, but he had even more to do the second time around. The role was recast with Augustus Prew, who was best known for his role in The Borgias. Kick-Ass 2 had a litany of other eyebrow-raising concerns outside of Peters' recasting, so the actor swap flew further under the radar than it probably would have otherwise. The movie was met with a far harsher reception across the board than the well-liked original, and the situation wasn't aided by the fact that Jim Carrey, who played one of the lead roles in the sequel, went around denouncing the movie publicly ahead of its release. Peters' absence from Kick-Ass 2 was chalked up to scheduling conflicts with the second season of American Horror Story. Strangely, he had successfully juggled another role in a superhero property. He played Pietro Maximoff, aka Quicksilver, in 2014's X-Men Days of Future Past and 2016's X-Men Apocalypse.